First World War has been described by some as a European civil war. However, because of the extent of European colonial empires in 1914, the conflict was a European civil war fought on a global scale. Most of the combatants in Africa were African soldiers in colonial service, and most of the civilians affected by the war were African villagers. Africa, with the exception of the independent states of Liberia and Ethiopia, was entirely under the colonial control of Belgium, Germany, France, Britain, Italy, Portugal and Spain. The war in Africa is best understood as the attempt by the Entente powers to capture all four German African colonies, Togoland and Cameroon in West Africa, German Southwest Africa and German East Africa. These territories, with their ports and radio stations, were considered a threat to Allied shipping in the Indian Ocean and the South Atlantic. Togoland, the smallest German colony in Africa, and the only German colony which produced a profit for Berlin, was captured by British and French colonial forces on the 26th of August 1914. Cameroon was a much larger territory and provided a much greater challenge. British troops from a neighbouring colony of Nigeria captured the port city of Douala on the 27th of September 1914, forcing the Germans to withdraw inland. The British and French continued to advance, and the German force finally surrendered in February 1916. German Southwest Africa bordered the self-governing, by a white minority government, Union of South Africa. Prime Minister Louis Botha first had to put down a revolt by anti-British Afrikaners in 1914-1915 before he could consider capturing the German colony. The invasion force was mainly Afrikaner, but it involved some Africans and Indians in support roles. The operation began in February 1915 and continued until the German surrender in July 1915. East Africa, now Tanzania, was the largest German colony in Africa and would prove the most difficult to occupy. The first attempt by Indian troops to capture the port of Tanga in 1914 had failed. The second attempt, led by General Jan Smuts, deployed a force mostly of white South Africans of Afrikaner and British backgrounds to East Africa in 1916. This force found it difficult to operate in East Africa due to disease and inexperience and was withdrawn. From 1917 onwards, a British force was enlarged and Africanised, employing Kenyans and other East Africans from the King's African Rifles and Nigerians and other West Africans of the West African Frontier Force. This resulted in a force of 40,000 soldiers and 150,000 native porters. By contrast, the German force led by Major General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck and his Schutztruppe, a force of German officers and predominantly black African soldiers called Askaris, never exceeded 25,000. The war conducted in the region was totally different to that on the Western Front. This was a war of movement and small raids. Lettow-Vorbeck invaded the neighbouring Portuguese colony of Mozambique in late 1917 and was in northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, when the armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918. The war in East Africa would be the longest campaign in the war, with the Germans not surrendering until the 25th of November 1918. Both the German and British forces used native porters, including women and children, most of these being from Kenya. Of the 105,000 British deaths recorded during the East African campaign, 90% of the deaths were the native porters. These factors contributed to the war having a devastating effect in Africa.